Our next speaker is Chrissy Burley. She's the Deputy Coordinator of JPI Healthy Diet for Healthy Life, and she's also Project Officer for the FIT4FOOD2030 project at Zoom MW. And today she will introduce the Fit for Food Policy Lab concept.
Thanks for the introduction, Matt, and for the great introduction also, Tim. So my name is Chrissy Burley, and Matt already explained a little bit about who I am and what I do. So I'm the Deputy Coordinator of the Joint Programming Initiative, A Healthy Diet for a Healthy Life, and through the JPI HDHL, as it's also known, we are part of the Fit for Food 2030 project, and we coordinate the policy labs. And it's the policy labs I'm going to give you an introduction to today. So maybe to start with the first and possibly obvious question, what is a policy lab? The concept already existed before Fit for Food, and in essence, a policy lab, or a policy innovation lab as it's also called, aims to tackle complex public problems or societal challenges that more traditional government structures are not managing to solve in the current situation. And they are set up as participatory and experimental space in which diverse stakeholders work together to develop and, where possible, test novel policy and approaches. This participatory and experimental space, it should be seen as a series of interrelated and interactive sessions with dedicated topics and methods. So it's the structure in which policy innovation can take place. And a policy lab in this sense that we mean should also have direct connections to the public policy arena. So elsewhere within a company or within your local sports club, you could have something and call it a policy lab, but that's not what we mean by this. It should be connected to public policy. Then we go, okay, so quite a lot about this has already been said. Which problems are we dealing with? It was covered in the previous webinars, and Tim already also said quite a bit about it. So I'm not going to stick too long with this. Our food systems face complex and persistent problems. We say research and innovation can and should be a catalyst for transformation of the food system to being healthy, to being sustainable, equitable, all those things. But R&I has some problems of its own, such as fragmentation into disciplines and little support for interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research. There's very low involvement of citizens, consumers, end users. For example, there tends to be an emphasis on open calls, fundamental research, which can make it difficult to address specific societal challenges. And there isn't always a good connection between the needs of the thematic policy making and the way that we fund and carry out research. So in order for R&I to have more impact on the transition of the food system, we also need to innovate our R&I systems. Which is where Fit for Food 2030 and in this case the policy labs come in, because we present the policy labs as an instrument in order to make R&I systems more impactful on the food systems transition. So yes, there we go. R&I policy labs in Fit for Food. So for the purpose of Fit for Food, the policy labs are R&I policy labs. They work at a national and sometimes a regional level, and the goal is to increase the impact of R&I on making food systems future-proof, as I just said. They do this by building a network of diverse stakeholders and really making a point of also including the unusual suspects who would normally not be involved in policy discussions. And together, these stakeholders analyze the current food system and related R&I landscape. They define barriers and opportunities, and they work on making R&I policy more coherent if necessary. So really aligning R&I policy if this comes out of their analysis, but also on innovating R&I policy. Central aspects of this policy lab process should be a holistic, systemic approach and responsible research and innovation, or RRI. And by a holistic approach, we mean to take into account the food system as a whole, with all its different aspects, so agriculture and food processing, but also logistics and nutrition and health and food waste. And this means that the stakeholders involved should also come from different parts of the system, both in terms of the area they work in, but also their type of role, such as policymakers, researchers, farmers, people who work in industry, and again, consumers. But you could also think of involving lawyers or behavioral psychologists in order to really get that full breadth of expertise and that systemic approach. Sorry if it's taking, I have to switch between screens in order to get the right slide on. So yeah, this is just a little bit about responsible research and innovation. What do we mean by this? The systemic approach and the involvement of different stakeholders and end users is very central to responsible research and innovation, which aims to make the way that we conduct research more diverse and inclusive, open and transparent, anticipative and reflexive, and responsive and adaptive. There you have all of them. Making it better equipped to solve social issues and also to have a strong support base in society. And Tim just also spoke a little bit about that and how important that is in order for us to move forward. So that brings us to, so I'm now having mouse issues. Yeah, so how did we start in Fit for Food? The project started on the 1st of November 2017, and we started setting up the policy labs through an open call in late 2017, and this was disseminated via the consortium network, the partners in Fit for Food. We were aiming to start with a first group of 5 labs, but there was so much interest that we decided to start with 7, so that was great. And we recruited a second group of policy labs at the start of 2019, which resulted in another 4 policy labs, which means we ended up with 11 instead of the 10 that had originally been foreseen. And the criteria to run a policy lab were commitment letters from at least 2 relevant ministries to try and really ensure from the start that holistic approach. And the applicants, so the ministries in this case, needed to provide 2 people to act as national policy lab coordinators with their own funds to show commitments to the project. Ideally, these coordinators should work in policymaking, for example, at one of the ministries or a closely related institution. In case we had more eligible applicants than we could accept, geographical spread also became a factor. Yes, there we have them. So these are our 11 policy labs. First group, Flanders, Hungary, Italy, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Norway, and Romania. As you can see, 6 countries and 1 region. And then in the second group of 4, Austria, Basque Country, Estonia, Ireland, we have 3 countries and 1 region again. And the policy labs are part of what we call the Food 2030 platform, which connects the local level through the city labs in Fit for Food, the national and regional level through the policy labs, and the European level through the Fit for Food EU think tank, which you can all see on this lovely map here. And the EU think tank, of which Tim is a member, it consists of high-level experts, and it forms the linking pin between the labs and the wider project on the one hand, and the European Commission on the other. Okay, so once we had our 7 policy labs at the start, what were they supposed to do? And we now come to this general structure of the policy lab with its series of interrelated meetings with dedicated topics, as I said at the start, which is what you see here. What you are looking at in this policy lab honeycomb graph is in the blue, sort of the overall process that the labs go through. And then in the light green are the themes for the 4 meetings with the stakeholder network that are foreseen in the project. And in the dark green, you see the training and learning sessions that the project provides to the lab coordinators in order to prepare them for their role and to support them throughout the project. So what does this all mean? We go to the first phase or meeting. So system awareness and analysis, and what we mean by that is having understanding first of the food system, understanding of the main challenges and the knowledge questions of the key players of the food system, and to begin making an overview of the existing research agendas and the research programs that are relevant to this on the national level or the regional level, depending also on how research is organized. And also to think with that initial group of stakeholders that you have together there, who are we missing, and to try and add those, of course, to the network. Then we go to future outlook and agenda setting, which is very much discuss and agree upon a collective vision of the food system. Within Fit for Food, we think this is very important to have kind of like everyone facing in that same direction and to have something that you can go back to but this is what we envision for the future. So how can we get there? You make an assessment of the R&I landscape. This could be done, for example, by a SWOT analysis, and you draft or you begin to draft a roadmap to improve the R&I landscape and to work towards your vision or the ultimate goal. And then in phase 3 or meeting 3, experimentation and innovation. So deciding on promising ideas and how to put these into action during within the project that was about 12 months. This could be different ways of funding research to stimulate a systems or an R&I approach, better connecting regional and national activities, a plan for multi-stakeholder collaboration to develop a research program, policy brief, etc. Taking into account, of course, the work from the earlier meetings and the input generated by the project outside of the policy labs, that is, but also quite important, agreeing on expectations, indicators, monitoring, and how can the outcome of this experiment contribute to a sustainable change in food systems R&I. The idea is in this phase to really help the labs from talking to doing and to put something into action during the time span of the project, if possible. This can be about the content of the research, but also about how research is conducted and trying to solve barriers in the R&I system. So, for example, offering financial incentives for inter or transdisciplinary research. And it's good to remember that the lab in itself is often already an experiment. Then in phase 4, which is continuity and legacy, the labs will evaluate what has been done, what has the impact been, and what are the lessons learned, but also if and how the work of the lab will continue. So addressing questions like what will happen to the stakeholder network and are there structures that the lab can be embedded in. I think it's good to mention here that this structure is necessarily quite abstract and really a general outline, as the local context and the starting points of the different labs are very different. So for each lab, there is a high degree of figuring out their own path and being responsive and adaptive along the way based on how things develop, which can be both a blessing and a little bit of a curse sometimes, but there you go. You have to do something new to get somewhere. Okay, so that was the theory, which the policy lab coordinator then had to put into practice. This started with building the stakeholder networks, and obviously they mostly started with their own network, the network of their organization, and then snowballed from there. Some deliberately started with a small group of stakeholders, and others started straight away with casting the net very wide, so different strategies there. And sometimes in order to reach certain stakeholder groups, policy lab meetings were organized back to back with other events, such as an industry conference, which could work very well sometimes. So in these first meetings on systems awareness and analysis, we saw that the identified strengths varied a lot. So for example, as you see on the slide, the participants mentioned good food safety, food system based on tradition, good recycling of materials, and trust between actors. So very good if they in fact already had that. And maybe unsurprising, there were much more commonalities in the weaknesses and challenges, such as lack of sustainable or circular production, issues with food waste, lack of cooperation between actors, low involvement of consumers. And here, where is my cursor? There we go. Here you see a brief example of the impression of the types of participants that were there. We asked the coordinators to put into this little matrix after the meeting. And if we go to the second meetings, visioning and drafting of the roadmaps. So this was about developing the collective visions. We see here a lovely example of what came out of that. So this is a visual of the vision of the Hungarian Policy Lab. Working towards 2030, and then here's an overview of R&I factors that hinder or support the vision. In the third meetings, the labs talked about this idea of experimentation and innovation, so if and how they might be able to put some of the opportunities they identified or pathways to impact into practice. So some of the labs launched or are planning to launch food system calls, innovative food system calls. For example, in the Netherlands, a sandpit call was launched for the transition of the food system, and other labs are working on research agendas or policy briefs. And I've given some examples here of identified priority areas or missions, such as you see here on the slide. So the principles of circular economy come back throughout the food landscape. We are striving for a climate neutral food system. We are taking nutrition research to the next level. And here a different example from a different lab. Appreciation of the production, agricultural farmers' role, opportunities for developing generational relief, the social organization change, multi-level governance, and regulation development and application. So quite different there, so that's interesting. and again, very much dependent on that local context. So where are we now in Fit for Food and with the labs? The project will finish at the end of this year, and the labs are slowly moving into the phase of taking stock and establishing which lessons were learned. So what has been achieved, what has changed since the lab started. From the project, we are thinking along with the labs about ambitions and opportunities for continuation of the lab, or at least the work, and the stakeholder network. And we hear a strong ambition amongst the coordinators that their experiences should feed into ongoing policy developments, European policy developments, such as the implementation of the Farm to Fork strategy and also the Food Systems Partnership in Horizon Europe. Of course, we can already say something about the achievements so far. We are talking about the building of the diverse networks. The participants are generally very positive about the policy lab and the process. Others are asking to join. They are managing to raise awareness about the systems approach. They are connecting different existing initiatives nationally, but we've also seen examples where a lab has connected to the Horizon Europe Mission Board on soil health and food. So the launch of food system calls, as I mentioned, some have managed to get integrated food policy on agenda of the government, and input from the labs has been taken up in national strategies, gaining political support, increased contact between ministries, and some labs have also published articles about what they're doing. So also part of raising awareness. Some very good news there. But where there is achievement and success, there are also some challenges. Of course, always complexity, time, and money. We have found that the project is very complex. It takes a while for people to wrap their head around it, especially sort of this connection between the food system and food policy, and then the role of R&I that Fit for Food is about. Reaching and engaging certain stakeholders, such as consumers, health, and industry, can be quite hard. Sustaining or broadening political support, I would say that these two, engaging certain stakeholders and sustaining the support, are the big ones. Those are really difficult and also very important, especially the political support. There are elections, developments, and things change. There are new people, which can make everything very difficult. And so the diversity of local context, it can be a richness, but it can also be a challenge. In terms of a project and a process that you're trying to go through together, and what is the place of the lab in case of a full national landscape, because in some countries there's actually already quite a lot going on, but there is often then there is coordination lacking, and then in some cases the policy lab has taken up that role, so it can be hard to stick to the foreseen timeline because of all these different developments going on. And sustaining the labs, which is of course something that we're working on now with them. I will skip this for now, but might be interesting to read back. What do the coordinators say about the added value of the Fit for Food Policy Lab for them? So the actual structure and within the project that we offer. And then we come to the end. Finally, we are developing a Policy Lab handbook, which will be published later this year. On how to set up an R&I policy lab for everyone who is interested in doing this themselves. It will include tips and tricks and lessons learned from the current labs, and we expect that a first version will be available after the summer. Thank you for listening today. I hope it was inspiring or at least interesting.